Welcome to Citizens Forum. I'm Walter McGinnis. I'm the host of the show. And today we have with us Brian Burchell. Brian is a member of a group called The Rest, and they are one of the groups that are looking at the proposed new sewage treatment plant, which could hardly be called new, but looking at the proposed sewage treatment system that we're going to be possibly imposed upon us by our governments here, and is being covered by the CRD. So we're going to go over a few things about what we consider to be some concerns with this design. So welcome to the show, Brian.
Thank you, Walt.
And I know you wrote a letter in November 2015
Yes.
to the Prime Minister and the Government of Canada.
Correct.
And you expressed some concerns about the ongoing things that have been happening here.
Yes.
Firstly, has the government responded to your letter?
Yes, they did. I sent a follow-up letter too, added some more to it, because when we sent that original letter, and it was an open letter in the papers, a full-page ad, just a couple weeks prior, there had been a presentation at UVic that we didn't know about at the time, in which the Department of Fisheries' own marine scientists had shown that if the proposal at that time had been implemented, the change to the straits would have been negligible. So I wrote another letter to the Prime Minister's office pointing out this information, that here
Your own
regulations.
guys.
Yeah, your own guys. It's a statute of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. It's their regulations, and yet their own people are saying, if you spend $1 billion for this, you're going to get negligible improvement. So yeah, I pointed that out, and I did get an acknowledgement from the Prime Minister's office. They said they'd sent it on to the Minister of the Environment. We had actually copied the Treasury and the Minister of the Environment and the Minister of Infrastructure. Anyhow, that was back, well, it was January 22nd, we got the acknowledgement. It wasn't until May 20th that the Minister of the Environment sent us a letter. And we were extremely dissatisfied with it. It was a very, just brushing us aside with great generalizations. It did not get into the specifics. And so we were very disappointed with it.
So the Ministry of the Environment did reply.
Yeah.
And are they looking at, for instance, the problems with the science that's been presented up to this point? Are they accepting that the information's been presented now? Is that adequate for them?
What happened was that, first of all, the letter is signed by the minister, but the phrasing in it indicates to us that it was written by her parliamentary secretary, Mr. Jonathan Wilkinson. It certainly looks like it was written by him. And no, it did not use, well, he used generalizations. The science says, blah, 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 that, yeah, this is a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And they use sweeping statements of, well, effluent is a major source of contamination, and untreated wastewater causes things like fish kills and algal blooms and so on, all of which are probably true in general. But do they apply to Victoria? So it did not do what the national strategy required, and that is site-specific analysis.
Yeah.
Instead, he's just making very broad, generalized statements. So it was very unsatisfactory. Actually, we complained about the risk level we're set at high risk. It's what we've been deemed to be high risk, and we pointed out that's incorrect. And what he's written back, I say he because I think it was the parliamentary secretary, he said no mechanism in the regulations exists to change that. Well, that's not true.
Yeah.
Well, pardon me. It may be true that there's nothing in the regulations, but there are ways for the federal government to change statutes. They can do that. I mean, no statute is etched in stone. They all
If they were motivated, obviously they'd find a way.
So they did not give us a scientific answer. This is the second time where we said, please give us the science. We're open. Just give us the science. Give us the references. We'll look through it. The scientists are waiting. You keep referring to the science. Give it to us, because if we're wrong, we'll go away. I want to go away from this, but so far they haven't given the science.
Well, it's a similar position that the earlier Conservative government was taking. Wasn't it pretty well the same thing?
Yeah, the anti-science Conservative government put all this together. So really the Liberals are running with that same flawed regulation. And what I'm trying to do is to get the ministries to stop and take a look at this and look at the arguments. They're very sound arguments that our cabal of councillors should be making for us. We shouldn't have to be doing this, but the councillors that we have presently, or most of them, are pushing this. They're assuming that whatever they build is just going to be better than what we got. We keep hearing it, right? Oh, we can't keep doing that. We can't keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, it's all very strange when you start to look into it.
Oh, when you look into it, absolutely.
You wonder what are they basing their rationale on? There doesn't seem to be anything there.
And we keep asking. But one of the things, one of the rationales is the regulations were written for protection of drinking water.
Yeah.
If you get onto the website, the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment, get on their website, and all the supporting document for the regulations are there, and it's definitely for protection of fresh water. And the regulations are rather well written for the protection of drinking water.
Yeah.
What I understand, people who've been following this closely for years, is that a rather hasty, I'll say flippant decision was made. Oh, well, just include all discharges. In other words, discharges into the ocean also, as well as into lakes and rivers. No consideration for the very different chemical environment of the ocean. The ocean is way different chemically than fresh water. So they slipped up there. They missed a chance to use the ocean, the resource of the ocean, and its treatment capabilities.
Yeah. So I mean, they're skipping over some very important facts here. Has the Minister of the Environment, is Minister McKenna, now has she has written specifically back to you and addressed those concerns, or is it basically?
No, those are the ones that just came back in generalizations and assumptions.
Nothing has been said.
No, it's just generalizations and assumptions. And I wrote back, and that's something to point out, is this business of assuming actually violates a key component of the national strategy for implementation of the regulations.
Yeah.
You may not make assumptions. Okay, it's not the law. What it is it's a very emphatic few paragraphs, is the past practice of assuming that if you just build a wastewater treatment plant, you're going to be better off. And they're saying, not anymore. Times are tight. You must do site-specific cost-benefit analysis to prove, the phrase is economic efficiency. What we get should be, we should get more in return for what we spend. There should be more benefit to us, to our health, to the environment, to whatever, for the $1 billion we're going to spend. So that is supposed to be done, and that's not being done. They're just assuming, oh, it'll be better off. We'll be better off.
Now, have you seen the plan that the Provincial Government Project Board has recommended?
I haven't read it front to back, but I certainly have read portions of it, and I find in it some, certainly some problems. One, I'll just dig up here. First of all, it says that there's preliminary treatment and no other wastewater treatment occurs in our present system. That what we're currently doing is that there's preliminary treatment. So first of all, they're admitting there is treatment. They keep saying it's untreated. Well, it's not. The CRD website had said for years that it's treated, and here, this document, they're admitting it's treated. But it's saying no other treatment occurs.
Yeah.
That is very disingenuous, because we have an exemplary source control program.
Yeah.
So what it's doing is preventing things from going in, rather than letting them go in and be parts per million and spend an awful lot more energy to remove them further downstream.
Makes so much sense.
Plus, they keep saying, well, we don't have resource recovery. That's another thing they say. We don't have resource recovery. Well, if you're taking it out at source, you're getting a resource that you don't have to try to extract later downstream.
Yeah.
So we do have resource recovery. They also say, well, we're not extracting energy from the current system. What they're not considering is our system is a very low energy system. We're not putting much energy in. So instead of putting energy in and extracting it, we're spending less energy in the first place. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, if you look at the plan, I mean, in general, from what I understand, they're planning on pumping it all the, whatever you call that stuff at the end, sludge, up to Heartland Landfill, which is like 15 kilometers away or something.
18-kilometer pipeline, and it's got to rise about 200 meters.
Pumping it back.
Probably
pumping something back
to
the
I suppose
ocean.
There'd be some pumping, but mostly gravity-fed, I would think. But
I see.
But certainly, the previous plan was 5 pumps along the way to get it up 200 meters into Heartland.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of pumps, a lot of equipment. That reminds me of something else I wanted to bring up, is the treatment process itself. I've since seen some documentation. The treatment process itself causes a problem. It cleans up some things, but it can cause a problem. And I saw the data out of Annacis Island.
Yeah.
Lulu and Lionsgate The problem doesn't appear to exist there, but it does in Annacis and apparently some places outside of Canada, some studies outside. And the problem is this, that the agitation, all the handling of the effluent, the water, the wastewater, there's dissolved metals in there. In our system, the dissolved metals are, or I should say the metals, are at extremely low levels. They're like as much as 1,000 times less than drinking water standards, right in the pipe, and they're not an effect to us. But most of it's particulate, like we've got copper pipes in the buildings, and particles of copper come off, and from some of the plumbing particles of zinc.
Yeah.
And so there's particles, and they're at low levels and don't bother us, and they generally, it appears, don't bother the aquatic life either, except that as it's flowing along and tumbling along, some of the particulates dissolve. And dissolved copper, and perhaps dissolved zinc, are neurotoxins to fish. And it appears, in some cases, treatment actually increases the amount of dissolved copper. So that's something that we need to do in a cost-benefit analysis, is study this and find out, well, what we're proposing here, it's going to be a higher level of treatment. So is it going to raise the level of dissolved copper that our system will be sending out? And if that's true, if it turns out that the amount of dissolved copper that we're putting out into the strait here is more than our current system, then we're going backwards.
We're worse off.
Then we are violating the objective of the regulations, which is, quote, to reduce the threat to fish and fish habitat.
Yeah.
If our system is going to cause more trouble.
Let me just bring up one point. I know you did a Freedom of Information request.
Correct.
What was that all about?
That was, actually, I've got a confirmation from the federal government that it's been accepted. And what that was is last week, again, Environment Minister's Parliamentary Secretary, Jonathan Wilkinson was here and did a presentation to a luncheon for the Victoria Chamber of Commerce.
Right.
And the paper reported that he had stated, and I think in his presentation or sometime that while he was here, he stated that, and I've got it here. We, the Minister of Environment, the government, federal government, we revisited the science, and the federal government is comfortable that this is an appropriate step, this being the new plan, is an appropriate step from an environmental perspective. Well, once again, we revisited the science. Here's the science. No
Mysterious
references,
science.
right? So I immediately say, well, again, show us the science. So I've made a request, a Freedom of Information request, and the question I've asked for is, please provide us with the science that Mr. Wilkinson is referring to. And what dates was it revisited? When did you revisit that science? Please give us links. When did you revisit? Also, who made the decision that the federal government is comfortable with this new plan? And what's that person, under what authority did that person make that decision?
Oh, great
So
questions.
I put those 4 questions in, and they have 30 days to respond, apparently. And I've got the acknowledgement that it's accepted, and they're working on it.
So I hope that you're willing to come back and give us the answers to those questions.
Yes, absolutely.
And let's talk about that.
Yeah.
In many ways, in my view, now that this decision has been made by the CRD,
Yes.
this game's just getting started, in my view, because now they have to try to force this down our throats, in my view, because I don't think most of the public agree with what they want to do. So these things are very important to bring forward.
I've heard the business community, some of the business community is concerned about this plan. One of the mayors in the greater Victoria area is, Mayor Atwell.
Yeah.
He's expressed some concerns. I heard him on a radio station here, and he had some very good power to him. Kudos to Mr. Atwell. He's asking some pretty darn hard questions.
I think Richard's done great work on this file, and maybe
Smart
someday
man.
we'll have him on our show. Anyway, thank you so much, Brian. It's been a short interview, but we'll hope to see you in a few weeks and we'll get an update.
Be glad to be back.
So that concludes this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome back to Citizens Forum. I'm your host, Walt McGinnis. I have with me today my good friend, Mehdi Najari, and we're going to be talking about two issues, two pressing issues for Canadians and then particularly for British Columbians. That's the Cntr Morgan pipeline and the proposed Site C dam, well, the Site C dam that's now going ahead. And we're also going to look at some issues about how these two mega projects are related. So I think we could start out with with the announcement by the Liberal government on July 29th, on a Friday, a nice warm Friday afternoon in the summertime, in which the BC Liberal government made their announcements to approve 2 further permits to continue on with the Site C dam. So let's pick it up right there, Mehdi.
Yeah.
What do you think happened when they issued those permits, and what's been set in place now?
See, the people expected a different treatment. The First Nation and the environmental group and the people in general expected a different treatment by this government, because this is exactly what Harper was doing.
Yeah.
So the Trudeau government promised to have a new relation with First Nation people. They also promised that respect their treaty rights, their rights to their land and traditional territories. But then, without any warning, they came in on July 29th, a Friday afternoon, in the middle of the summer, and issued 2 permits that would allow the work to proceed, the continuation of the work, and more devastation of the area, and changing the site as much as they can. We have to remember, Walt, that the 2 Indian groups, the Prophet River and also West Moberly groups, are in court. The case is in the court. Mr. Trudeau not only disrespected the treaty rights of these people, he is also disrespecting the court process by allowing this work continue.
Yeah.
Why didn't he has to rush? He has no reason to rush. He could have waited until the court make the decision. They are going to hear it this fall.
Yeah.
But by rushing it, they know they are going to maybe lose in the court, but they are going to make enough change on the landscape that it's become inevitable.
Yeah.
First of all, we have to remember we don't need this Site C energy. So we have to sell it to somebody else because we don't need it. So what they are doing is this: they are spending $8 to $13 billion of taxpayers' money or citizens' money, public money, to build this dam. And then, because they don't need the energy, they have to find a buyer. They are going to sell the energy to province of Alberta at below the cost. So we are going to lose money. We are producing energy from Site C dam, selling it at loss to province of Alberta. Province of Alberta will sell it at loss, subsidize it, and sell it to the tar sand producers. So instead of tar sand producers use coal for the energy to produce bitumen, they are going to use our electricity. And for all this favor they are doing to the people of BC, we have to allow them to build more pipelines to ship their bitumen, dirty oil, to the tidewater so they can make more profit by selling it to China and not to go to United States. So who is benefiting here with all these activity is for corporate interests, and who is paying the cost? We the people.
You know, we saw so much. The dark years of Prime Minister Harper. And no matter what happened, we just basically had to live through it. And then we had the election of this new young Prime Minister, Trudeau, and we were hoping for something better. And it saddens me to see that it's more or less business as usual. It just seems to be the interests that Harper was serving. It seems that Mr. Trudeau has just picked up where Harper's left off.
And that is the problem, because he is trying to do as much damage just until people wake up. Just before people wake up, because he produced this image of himself that he's going to be different. Remember, during the summer, what was the media coverage of Mr. Trudeau? He did a photo bombing of a wedding in Tofino. He was shirtless in a campground in Quebec. His wife fashions are very up to date. This is the type of coverage we see, but not the fact that they are devastating or in environmental front. The people of, let me read to you the response of the Grand Chief Stuart Phillips after on July 29th. He is the president of Union of BC Indian Chief.
Now, this is after the Liberal government has approved Site C dam, basically.
Give the permits. The honeymoon is over. Treaty 8 has just granted a hearing in the Federal Court of Canada this September. Rather than respecting the treaty rights of the Prophet River and West Moberly and the legal process by pausing or even slowing down site preparation and construction, the Trudeau government, like cowardly, thuggish thieves in the dark, quietly issuing federal permit before a long weekend to allow for acceleration of the construction.
So I mean that shows where all the consultation and all this nation-to-nation discussions that was supposed to be going on. I guess that just happens afterwards, like it always has up to this point.
This is what they put in the platform. While government grant permit for resource development, only communities can grant permission.
Yeah.
And Mr. Trudeau, communities didn't grant permission. And you have been proven to be deceptive in what you promise in your platform and what you are doing now.
Well, if Trudeau and his cabinet, I guess that's a community. I guess they define that as a community. I just want to mention something because, you know, it really hits hard when you think about we're subsidizing the oil and gas industry in British Columbia. We're not going to renewable energy. We're not looking at solar and all that in any serious way. We have thousands and thousands of people in this country, in this province, depending on food banks. Even though the government of BC is declaring we're in a huge prosperity. The thing is that what's going to happen here in the next 2 or 3 years, and also I was going to ask you this, how much are we subsidizing the oil and gas industry in Canada? This is a question.
The IMF last year said that the total subsidy to fossil fuel industry in Canada is $34 billion. Is amazing number.
That's an annual
Yes.
subsidy
Yes.
to the oil and gas industry.
But another question is, if we didn't spend that initial $9 to $13 billion for Site C dam, what can we do with that?
Precisely.
You know, if we can reduce, you know, we can huge number of the houses can be retrofitted, you know, and reduce the energy. Don Scott he was an MLA in Manitoba. He lives in Victoria now. A few years ago, he put heat pump in his house, and he reduced his energy use by 70% annually. There is lots of things people can do to use less and not to devastate the environment, not to go, you know, trample over the rights of First Nation people. But that is not in the card because the profit of the corporate interests take precedent over your rights, my rights, and Aboriginal rights, and what kind of environment we have.
You know, $34 billion. Now, if we just didn't give what's, I think, one of the most profitable industries in the world is the oil and gas industry. If we just didn't give them that $34 billion, that is an incredible sum of money. I mean, if this is enough. You could basically end homelessness in Canada with $34 billion a year.
Let me, before we talk about Cntr Morgan, one last thing I said here. The Judy Wilson-Raybould, she's the Minister of Justice Minister of the Trudeau government, and she's First Nation person. This is what she said in 2012 about Site C dam. The country's reputation is at stake with approval of these projects like Site C dam, like the Enrich pipeline. Our reputation as caring and considerate, environmentally friendly nation internationally is going to be questioned, and running roughshod over Aboriginal title rights, including treaty rights, is not the way to improve that reputation. So where is Judy Wilson-Raybould, where her government is doing all those things that she was condemning in 2012? Nowhere to be found.
So did you want to touch a little bit on the Cntr Morgan pipeline?
Yes, the Cntr Morgan pipeline, because we had the federal panel came here just a few weeks ago in August, and the reason we had that federal panel because the NEB, National Energy Board process, was so full of holes and so disrespected because it didn't consider the science, it didn't consider climatic change, for effect of having
Well,
these
these guys are
pipelines.
kind of oil industry executives, the guys that
Exactly.
sit on
It's
the board.
Oil industry executing people that picked up by oil industry. So Mr. Trudeau said we have to have consent of the people and consider people. So they come with this new process, and we had the federal panel. The problem with this federal panel was that first of all, it was biased. Miss Kim Baird, the head of this federal panel, Kim Baird, was very close, has very close relationship with Kinder Morgan president Ian Anderson. But more important than that, she is a lobbyist for fossil fuel industry. She is with Hill and Knowlton, and one of her client is wood fiber LNG. So the government of Trudeau, Mr. Trudeau, put a lobbyist for oil industry as the head of the panel to report to him what people of British Columbia want. Can you believe that?
Well, the thing is, I could, because when I was looking at the last federal election and looking at who was advising Trudeau and advising the other leaders, and they all seemed to be all coming from public relations firms. But Kinder Morgan did pop up in Trudeau's key advisor, who ran into some trouble near the election about conflict of interest. He was a Kinder Morgan guy. So here we have them right in the top positions in government, the top advisors that have direct links to the corporations that want to do the business.
Not only that, the person in charge of this file is the lead minister is Jim Carr. Jim Carr was the head of the Manitoba Business Council.
Yeah.
He chose a chief of staff for himself as a minister of natural resources. His chief of staff is a woman by the name of Janet Ansley. Janet Ansley worked for 9 years for Shell, and for 3 years she was the vice president of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers.
Yeah.
So who is calling the shot?
Well, you know, if they actually had some type of real change of heart, and they knew how the system works because they were inside of it, that'd be one thing. But it doesn't seem that their interests are anything to do with the best interests of the public. They seem to be still serving the interests of the large corporations. So we're going to have to wrap up at that, Mehdi. I'm sorry it's such a short interview. Of course, we're going to have you back to cover this and other issues as the fall goes on. Much appreciated. That concludes this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to Citizens Forum. I'm your host, Walt McGuinness. Today we're going to be talking about electoral reform, and particularly about a group called Fair Vote Canada. The federal government has promised to make the 2015 election the last election under the current first past the post voting system. It's established a special parliamentary committee to recommend alternatives. The committee is also looking at the merits of online voting, mandatory voting, and reducing the voting age. Today I'm interviewing Terry Dan-Spinnick. She's a member of Fair Vote Canada in the Victoria's chapter. So welcome to our show today, Terry. And firstly, let's find out why did you get involved in this?
Well, it goes back a little bit. I was born in the 60s. I was involved in movements for peace, for women, for racial equality. And it was the 60s, you know what that's like.
Yeah.
Then I had to earn a living, so I went into adult education and ended my career as a vice president academic of a college in Ontario. Was not able to be politically active then because of my position. Retired 10 years ago, moved to Victoria, and all of a sudden I'm a free woman.
And you're politically active.
And I can say what I truly believe, and it's just liberating. So what I usually do is I vote for the best candidate, not necessarily the same party. But what really disturbed me in the last election particularly was the need to vote strategically in order to remove the Harper government.
Yeah.
And I was really upset afterwards to see that 9 million voters had essentially wasted their votes.
Yeah.
because we ended up again with a government that has 39% of the popular vote, but 100% of the power. So, 9 million voters didn't get to elect somebody who represented their political
So
views.
we still have sort of a dictator, but maybe one we like a little better. But
Yeah.
still, the system is still
Exactly.
flawed.
And so that's why I thought we got to get to the root of the problem.
So what's your number one concern with the electoral system as we have today?
Well, I'm going to give an example because
Okay.
I'm an environmentalist, and so my biggest worry, what keeps me up at night, is climate change. And when you look at Canada's record, we're at the bottom of the barrel in terms of how the OECD ranks our performance. And what particularly gets me frustrated is, the game Jack in the Box?
Yeah.
Do you remember that game?
Oh yeah.
Where you're constantly shutting the lid down to keep Jack in the box.
Yeah.
So what we have first, we have Enbridge pop up.
Yeah.
We slam the lid and we hope for good. We have Kinder Morgan pop up, and we have BC's mayors say no way.
Yeah.
We have 2/3 of BC voters in public opinion polls saying don't want it, but who's listening? We have LNG. We have one right in our backyard, Steelhead for the Saanich Inlet.
Yeah.
And we have Site C, which is ongoing and really is my number one concern right now because it's a $9 billion dam that for energy we don't need.
Yeah.
It's going to flood farmland that would feed 1 million people, and it infringes on First Nation rights. So the link between all those concerns and electoral reform is that I'm getting tired, I'm getting dizzy of constantly.
Yeah.
And so I think electoral reform, having a proportional representation system,
Yeah.
would enable us to move away from this kind of short-term crisis response if we are able to ensure that voters, all voters, have a say in Parliament. And
Well,
it's
this
not
is
just,
it. I mean, I've been somewhat active at times in my life on different issues, and I always wonder, why is it I have to spend so much time trying to get my government to do the right thing?
Exactly.
And basically, it's the thing that most of us want.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to ask you, how would you see electoral reform how would it might benefit women, for instance?
That's
You know?
another issue dear to my
Yeah.
heart. And again, I was shocked to learn that only 26% of our parliamentarians, our MPs, are women, and we are rated 62 in the world.
But that's an improvement over the last government, isn't it, or no?
Yeah,
Not that much?
Not really, not in
Oh,
terms of the
interesting.
number of MPs.
Yeah.
The big improvement was Trudeau said equity in his cabinet, which
Okay.
I give him kudos for that.
Okay.
But we are 62, number 62 in the world after Angola, South Sudan, Afghanistan. I mean, that to me is crazy. And one of the researchers, Dr. Joanna Everett at the University of New Brunswick, said that if we had a proportional system, we'd have a 10% increase in women MPs right away.
Yeah.
If we leave it like it is, it's another 100 years
Yeah.
before we get gender parity.
And it's so much needed. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
And just one other
Yeah.
thing, Wally, is that I think the other reason women are more drawn to proportional systems is because it's based on consensus
Yeah.
and compromise, and that appeals, I think, to a lot of women as opposed to the aggressive one-upmanship of first past the post.
Well, and a lot of the humanity gets lost in these competitions
Yep.
where Kinder Morgan pipeline, it could destroy massive amounts of nature. It's just another thing that's discussed with Site C Dam or maybe with another issue. And nobody's really getting into it and say, oh my God, this is the risk we're really taking.
Exactly.
And empathy
Exactly.
and all that
I know.
doesn't seem to be as much of the male
No, it
personality. And I'm speaking for all males, and I shouldn't. But I think this would be a good step to see more women involved. I can't see
Yeah.
much of a downside.
No.
Now, we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to ask you a
Yep,
couple more
sure.
questions. Now, Fair Vote Canada wants to have some type of proportional representation system. What system does Fair Vote Canada support?
We don't support any one system. We're nonpartisan, but we have put forward in our brief to the Parliamentary Committee 3 models.
Yeah.
mixed member proportional MMP
Yeah.
that the Law Commission in 2004 recommended for Canada.
Yeah.
Single transferable vote, which BC people will be very familiar with. We
Yeah.
had 58% vote in favor
Yeah.
in 2005.
Very close.
So, you know, that's another viable model. And the new one is a hybrid model called rural urban proportional.
Yeah.
It kind of mixes MMP and STV, the best elements of that.
Because you
and-
can see how the population spread. You
Yeah.
have this huge geographic
Exactly.
area with very low population, but
Exactly.
the issues that are there affect the whole country.
But you know, our one bottom line is what we don't want is ranked ballots or alternative vote, which has been proposed.
Yeah.
And essentially that would exacerbate the problems we have now. You'd end up ranking your candidates, but it would tend to favor big centrist parties
Yeah.
at the expense of smaller parties.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have my number 2 and number 3 choice.
Yeah.
I want
yeah.
my first choice.
No, I think, you know, it would be very interesting to see what's going to happen and how
know.
the public's going to be consulted and where we're headed for that.
Yeah.
Now, one way to consult with the public would be to have a referendum. Now, don't you think that would be a good idea?
That's a thorny one, and I've been watching the hearings, and
Yeah.
it's, you know, the Conservatives are really strong on that. And I think my main, Fair Vote Canada hasn't taken an official position on that, so
Yeah.
I'm speaking personally here. Number one, it's not a constitutional matter. We're not required to have a referendum. Number two, it's about basic voter rights,
Yeah.
enabling, you know, the majority of voters who didn't get a voice in the last election. And that's not a question.
Yeah.
You know, it's like women's vote. Did
That's
we
right.
put that to a referendum?
fundamental
We
right.
didn't. We've done our homework. We've had
Yeah.
13 electoral reform processes in Canada.
Yeah.
All of them have recommended proportional representation. So I think we've done our work, and I also think referendums can be manipulated. Look at Brexit. Look at
Yeah.
what happened in BC, and it's, you know, this is a complex issue.
Yeah.
So my preference is to let the committee do the work. It's consulting all across Canada. It's interviewed 50 worldwide experts. I'd like to see them come up, reach a consensus.
Now, for example, I mean, obviously I'm sympathetic towards your view, but
Yeah.
for example, the federal Liberal government basically would be considered to have a mandate to go ahead with that because
Exactly.
they ran on
That's
that
exactly
in
it.
the election,
That's exactly
and it
it.
really influenced a lot of voting.
did.
Now, on the other side of it, you would see maybe approvals of maybe the Cntr pipeline or approvals of Site C Dam and all these environmental approvals that they didn't have a mandate for, in my view,
Right.
or a very
Right.
slim mention of
Yes.
these issues during the election campaign. They have no problem going right ahead with those.
Yeah.
So you can see where there is a problem here where the government should be acting more like a government on issues that are so important to the
Exactly.
Canadian public.
Exactly. And that's why I want to see proportional representation.
Yeah.
Because then all the voices would be at the table. You know, the
Okay.
Greens are not sufficiently represented, the NDP isn't sufficiently represented based on their share of the popular vote.
And look at other countries where
Yeah.
different types of
Exactly.
electoral reform has been implemented and proportional representation is there.
Exactly.
And you look at how they're making their decisions. It isn't all this fireworks and yelling and screaming
I know.
in their legislatures. It's all pretty calm. 'cause
There's
they're
90
managing.
countries.
Yeah.
Most of the democracies, strong democracies in the world, are using PR.
And I think
We're
they're
the
comparable.
anomaly.
But they are comparable with their job.
Yep.
They know they're there. They know they have to negotiate and compromise on their positions to bring the best thing forward for the
Yeah.
public. So there's hard to find a downside
Yeah.
to this. And I'm you know, now is the time for the public to get engaged too, because
Yes.
this is where the discussion's happening. So I want to ask you, what would you like our listeners to do that they could help bring this issue
Yeah.
forward?
Number one, the committee, the Special Parliamentary Committee, is coming to Victoria Tuesday, September the 27th. Please come on down. There's an open mic. Fair Vote Canada is sponsoring a rally, and it will start at 5:30 at the Harbour Towers Hotel. So we'd really encourage people to come to that. Let your MP know where you stand.
Yeah.
Go online, just Google ERRE, and you can complete the government's online survey. Just make your voice heard that you want to make sure every vote counts.
EERE, online survey.
ERRE.
ERRE. That's very important. I think
Right.
that's something that anybody can go click on and answer the survey. The rally on September 27th, I hope the show comes out before then. It may not, but if not, maybe next time if they come
Right.
back. And I think also contacting your member of parliament and saying, hey, we're interested here. We want something to happen here. Go to bat for us and get this going.
And I'm proud of the Capital Region. We've had about a dozen town halls now, sponsored by our MPs. 90% of the people have come out saying proportional representation.
Yeah, now's the time.
Yep,
so
it is.
let's not let this one, don't sit this one out, everybody. Let's make sure that they get this job done for us. And by the time the next election rolls around, we're going to have some kind of a fair voting system in Canada. Try to imagine that. Try to imagine something good's going to happen in this country. And you know, the governments are going to look a lot different once we start getting more of a say and we have more of a compromise sort of a parliament. I think it's time for a change on that in that score. So thank you so much, Terry, for coming in. Hopefully we'll can have you back in a little while and update us on how things have transpired and you know, to keep the public engaged.
Exactly. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So that concludes this segment of Citizens Forum.